So we're going to switch gears a little bit and move into some important minerals, including phosphorus and calcium. Actually, the Phytase talk is going to be a little bit about effects beyond phosphorus. So Dr. Merlin Lindemann is with us this afternoon. He received his PhD from the University of Minnesota with a dissertation focusing on digestive enzyme development in the young pig. He first joined the animal science faculty at Virginia Tech and eventually moved to University of Kentucky, where he currently holds the rank of professor of animal and food sciences. Merlin's involved in numerous professional societies and has served on many national and international research collaborations and initiatives. He's currently serving as project leader of the National Animal Nutrition Program, and he's with us today to talk about phytase and effects beyond phosphorus. So, Merlin?
Well, thank you, Alan. Obviously, I'm glad I invited myself to speak today. So, thank you to me. So, no, I'm happy to be able to talk a little bit about phytase, but we all know we're going to release phosphorus with that, but there have been a lot of studies in the last few years about superdosing the phytase, and so we'll speak a little bit about that and look at some of the effects apart from the phosphorus that is released. We see here phytate, or if we're talking about the acid, phytic acid rather than the salt. It's a storage form of phosphorus. If we look at different ingredients that might be in our diets, such as corn, we see that probably 80% of that total phosphorus is bound in the phytate form, and it varies for different ingredients. Structurally, we see it here on the right, and you see the 6 phosphate groups on that ring. It's going to be easiest to look at the screen here. If we are to remove all the phosphate groups in the 4 here, then we just have a ring structure. So we've got put the hydroxyl group on that carbon, and we have 3 phosphate groups that are released. Phosphate, all those phosphate groups, you take the hydroxyl group on the phosphate group and take the hydrogen off, and you've got charges there, and so they can bind to anything else with a charge. So in the gut, as you dissociate the zinc sulfate or copper sulfate or anything else, so plus 2 charges, they can theoretically bind to those charges and be bound. Amino acids have charges, obviously, with their side chains and other groups, so you can bind those. And so the question has been for many years, so how much are we losing just from the binding of phytase, phytate with other things in the diet? A few years back, when the animal science meetings were up in Quebec City, Lai Adiola, who's not here today, having the conference on Friday rather than Thursday, ended up with a conflict for his teaching. But I remember they had one person that spoke about why phytate and then phytase use does not give any other nutritional benefit beyond phosphorus. Lai took the other position and had to present on why use of phytase could potentially give some benefit in terms of other nutrients. And so that's been talked about for many years. We've got a lot more data now to substantiate there are some other effects, and we'll look at some of that in pigs, but a lot of that has been generated in broilers up to this point. Easy to show some things there. This particular graph is just looking at phytate binding to protein, creating a turbidity of the solution. If you have a blank, no turbidity in the solution. If you have all 6 groups of phytate still bound on that 6 phosphate groups bound on that inositol ring, you have a lot of turbidity. There's a lot of binding of protein with that particular compound. If you come down and start removing those phosphate groups, 5 phosphate groups here, we've cleaved off the one at the number 3 position, or you cleave off the one at the number 2 position here, or the number 6 position. Even just taking off one reduces the turbidity a lot. If we start to remove multiple groups, then the binding with the protein is very much reduced. So in a lab setting, you can show something like that. Now, this is broiler data. We'll have 3 or 4 slides with that. This is work that recently you may have seen presented at a DuPont webinar that took place in July on superdosing of phytase. One of the presentations was by Ravi Ravindran. Ravi was a graduate of Virginia Tech. He was there when I first started there, and he's done a lot of work in the broiler area. But this work that he presented, it wasn't his particular work, but we see as we degrade more of the phytate, moving toward 100% degradation of that we increase the amino acid digestibility. This is in broilers, not exactly repeatable in pigs, but we do show then that is a possibility. And then if we continue on, just another set of data that is Ravi's himself, we see it's the same type of thing. The others was total amino acids. This is individual amino acids, but showing that we do improve the individual amino acids digestibility in broilers if we add enough phytase. Now, beyond the amino acids, we do increase. If we look at fat digestibility in a corn-based or wheat-based diets, we're seeing increases in fat digestibility with phytase. We've done a fair amount of enzyme work at UK in the last few years, and some of it's been with xylanases, so looking at releasing energy from fiber with the xylanases. Quite a few of those studies have involved phytase also, and the one we'll be looking at today involves the co-supplementation of those also. But in the work looking at release of energy with the xylanase, a lot of people are just looking at fiber. And they'll look at NDF and ADF and a variety of measures of fiber. When we started working with this, we said, well, look, if we're going to measure total energy and we're going to measure fiber, why don't we also measure fat? It's pretty easy to do and do the fat digestibility. But nobody was looking at it because nobody says, well, I don't have a substrate that's going to release fat. One of the things we always saw was an increase in fat digestibility with phytase. So when I see this, I said, this is very consistent with what I've done. So we've used phytases from AB Vista. We've used it from DSM. We've used phytases from Huvie Pharma. All the time when we do those, same way with DuPont Danisco, we've used theirs. We've seen increases in fat digestibility. So I believe this. I've seen it with multiple sources of phytase. So it's a part of where we're getting some energy value also. And then this summation, just looking at ileal digestibility, increasing both starch, protein, and fat. That goes back to the year 2001. So there have been studies, especially in broilers, that show that you can get benefit beyond the phosphorus that's released. Now, in talking about phytase in pigs specifically, a lot of those studies are with low phosphorus or phosphorus deficient basal diets, obviously. That's where all the work started. And we want to determine how much phosphorus is released. But when we do have a response to that phytase in growth or anything else, to what extent is it from the phosphorus release, and to what extent might it be from anything else that might be released as a result of diminishing the anti-nutrient effect of that phytate molecule? You can never tell. We'll be talking now a bit about superdosing phytase, and in the studies that we've designed, it is fed in phosphorus adequate diets. So the diets that are already at about 105% of the NRC phosphorus requirement estimate. But in its superdosing, high doses, we can degrade all of that phytate in the diet, remove all 6 of those phosphate molecules. So that should remove the anti-nutrient effect. We saw that in the lab with that removing of the turbidity in a solution of protein and phytate. Then you're left with extra phosphoric effects. So it gives you a chance to see if there are improvements in such things as trace minerals, energy, amino acids, things like that. And if you do release those energy and amino acids, then you have the potential, at least, for some growth and feed efficiency effects in the pig themselves. There are inconsistent effects in the published literature, nothing abnormal from what we see with any nutrient. And the question then is, what are the reasons for that? Can we separate them if we understand them? It's actually great to have differences in responses in the literature. That allows us to see what the differences were and the conditions that they were run under, and it gives us an idea where we will get a response and where we might not. So I love it when there's differences. One of the things I learned early on as a young faculty member and was mentored by older faculty members was the pig never lies. Never does. So when there's differences in the literature, it's simply because you don't understand what the conditions were. It's a matter of problems in the interpretation of the results. It's not that the pig did anything different. The pig's going to do what the pig's going to do. So if you don't have the same results in different studies, there were conditions that differed. So never the pig's problem, always our problem. All right. So superdosing, there have been some superdosing in low phosphorus diet, but again, how much value is that? Because you're releasing phosphorus, that is needed. And so apportioning the response between that which is phosphorus and that which is not is difficult. In diets that are adequate in phosphorus, there are results that where we see no effect in growth rate and carcass characteristics, and there are some where we see some feed efficiency responses. Now these were superdosing phytase, and in this particular study by Josh Floor, who's here today, the feed efficiency increased up to 500. We wouldn't call that a superdose, but it did show that there's a response to the phytase in already a phosphorus adequate diet. So something was released that had value for the pig. In growing pigs, our study, this is a project funded by the National Pork Board, so certainly want to acknowledge their support. Our objective was to look at graded levels of phytase supplementation for growing pigs fed diets with or without xylanase. I won't show you those results today. May comment a bit on them when we go through, but I won't show you the results because of the time constraints. When they're fed a high fiber, phosphorus adequate diet. So it's high fiber because we are looking at xylanase here. So we're wanting to have enough substrate there that hopefully the xylanase can give a benefit if possible. And we've got corn DDGS, wheat middlings, corn germ meal in there. We've got a variety of fiber sources because again, we don't know everything about this situation. So we want to have a lot of substrate and a lot of types of substrates. This is kind of a proof of concept study. It's not down to the point of getting loading values for any of these things in our formulation matrix. We see the treatments here. In all of these, we've got a positive and negative control. The only difference there is some added oil. I believe it was corn oil. We'll see in a bit when we see the diet table. Then to this negative control, we add 500, 1,000, or 2,000 of phytase. So this is a negative control plus P for phytase and the different levels. We also have the xylanase, and then we have xylanase plus phytase at the same 3 levels. We did a previous study. This is the second of 2 studies we did on the Pork Board project. The first study looked at graded levels of xylanase. We did see a response there, and we reported that work at the Digestive Physiology of Pigs meeting in Poland last year. This is the second now where we look at graded levels of the phytase. This one we did not, we saw numerical effects of the xylanase, but they weren't statistically significant. So, but we have seen xylanase responses. 4 feeding periods consistent with the NRC 2012 weight ranges. We did include titanium dioxide in the diet in the final phase to do some digestibility calculations, and we did measure carcass with real-time ultrasound. Here's our diet. Way too many numbers on there, but the reason they're up there is because the numbers don't change. So 4 different phases are positive and negative control. You'll see everything within a phase stays the same, except whether a little bit of cornstarch or a little bit of choice white grease was the energy source. These are the only 2 things that are changing between these. So substrate levels not changing there. Hopefully we're not having major differences as a result of just these 2 changes. Hopefully it's only energy and we're not affecting passage rate, things like that. We had 13% of corn germ meal, 15% of DDGS, 15% of wheat midds. That's giving us a variety of substrates across there. And if we look at the total phosphorus, here's the levels right here. They are adequate, STTD phosphorus. We've got a variety of things that should be in your paper. The phytate phosphorus that we analyzed in there, so things that you can look at across those different things. We use the summit mixing approach, same as somebody described earlier. I believe it was Eric Van Houten. When we mix a huge amount of basal for all of these, and then to a certain amount of that basal, we add a little more oil, or we add a little more starch. But all of these ingredients are at the same level in those diets. We don't mix them individually. And then we mix the high level of phytase, and then we blend with the zero phytase. So trying to take out some of that error that can come from slight mixing errors or getting a different place in the bin of the corn or soybean meal, things like that. Nothing startling here. We are above on the xylanase because overage is in the bag. Here's our 500, 1,000, and 2,000 parts of phytase. Measured growth performance, carcass characteristics, total tract digestibility. All right, let's look at that performance. We do have a difference in growth rate as a result of positive or negative control. In a bit, I will pool the results of phytase across the two xylanase levels, but you can see as we go with higher levels of phytase, we've got a quadratic response there, both with and without that xylanase. And if we go to gain feed ratio, we have an improvement with increasing levels of phytase. So we are releasing nutrients that are used by the pig. It's not the phosphorus response. Now I did want to show you that we did not have a significant xylanase effect. We do have some numerical improvements. So here's our growth rate, slight improvement in growth rate, slight improvement in gain feed ratio. Wasn't significant in this study, but we did see a little bit of a response. We do not have an interaction between the two. All right, now we're going to move beyond that and look at digestibility and the effects on the carcass. Simply showing here that phosphorus digestibility, yes, there was enough phosphorus in the diet, but still phytase will release the phosphorus that is on the phytate. It's more phosphorus than the pig needs, but in terms of digestibility, we should see improvement. And yes, indeed, the phytase is working, so everything's as we would expect. Now, if we look at overall growth in this experiment and pooling those things, now we're seeing this is the response in overall growth, quadratic for that. That certainly looks like the same thing, but the p-value is not there. And gain feed ratio, we have a linear effect there in improving gain feed ratio. Now if we look at carcass, what did those released nutrients do for us? If we look at carcass lean percentage, we see that increasing. Lean gain per day, a very nice increase there. Lean gain per unit of feed is increasing. Back fat thickness had a quadratic response there. Responding in all of these to the addition of the enzyme to the diet. Now continuing further on the ATTD, if we look at dry matter, we've got a quadratic effect at 0.05. Here's the ether extract again. It's improving fat digestibility. That's part of the energy that is released. And then if we look at our fiber, neutral detergent and hemicellulose, we do have an improvement in neutral detergent fiber. The difference between neutral detergent and acid detergent fiber is the hemicellulose, and that's where it's coming in. The hemicellulose is the one. Acid detergent fiber, we had no significant effect there. And then this is just a repeat of what we saw earlier, an improvement in phosphorus digestibility, as we would expect. There is work, Tim Staley's work, and one of his students Dr. Lutz, L-U-T-Z, I can't remember his first name, work that was presented at meetings in Iowa when they were held there, the summer meetings in Ames. You can increase phosphorus absorption. Phosphorus in the urine will stay low until you meet requirement, and then phosphorus excretion goes way up. So what would have been happening here, we're improving digestibility. It's going out of the gut, it's going into the body proper. We're just going to urinate out the phosphorus we don't need after we use it. So, but I think it is important that we understand that phosphorus and nitrogen are related. We increased protein deposition, lean gain per day. Work from the NRC 2012 and looking at some graphs of phosphorus to nitrogen deposition. There's a direct linear relationship between phosphorus and nitrogen deposition. Gretchen created some of those graphs. Just a beautiful relationship there. So we do need some phosphorus when we're depositing more nitrogen. It can limit nitrogen deposition. Interaction, no statistical interaction observed, statistically significant. However, just looking at this gain-feed ratio, just numerical, we all know, and statistics are what tell us if it's related to treatment or not. So we're saying it's not related to treatment, but sometimes those stats, all the time those stats are dependent on the number of our observations. And we realize if we repeat this in time and other things, sometimes these things become significant. But just showing you that at the different levels of phytase, you know, there's certainly that xylanase looks like there may be value for more work looking at the combination of different enzymes together. So, increasing phytase level enhanced growth rate, feed efficiency, carcass leanness, and apparent total tract digestibility of several components that we measured. Xylanase in this particular study had no statistically significant effect, and there was no statistically significant interaction between the two. Now, superdosing to sows. Another thing, following the Grow Finish study where we clearly saw improvements in fat digestibility, we saw improvements in lean deposition, we saw improvements in NDF digestibility and hemicellulose digestibility, we then say, well, man, that might have some value in sows. That's certainly a situation where we're losing weight during lactation. It might be of value to release more nutrients from each mouthful of feed. So that maybe has something of value. I'll present in a little bit our first results of our study. But we did have a multi-university study just looking at phytase in normal diets and at low levels. This was work done by the old S145 committee of Southern Regional Sow Committee. So it would have been work out of Kentucky, Arkansas, North Carolina State, I believe, had some data in there. But in that particular study, we saw an improvement in bone breaking strength of the pigs. We slaughtered pigs at birth and at weaning and looked at bone breaking strength. As we added phytase to the sow diet, we increased bone breaking strength at weaning. We also increased the weaning weight of the pigs. So there were some indications that we had from our own work in other universities that weaning weight and bone strength might be improved. And there's some work that we'll see in a little bit that's already published that would say the sow herself might benefit from it. So we wondered then, because we had seen in the Grow Finish pigs some positive responses, then if we superdose phytase to sows, then might we reduce the weight loss during lactation? And might we improve litter performance and bone integrity based on us having seen that once already, and potentially increase milk phosphorus content? We're getting heavier pigs. We're either getting a different quality of milk or a different amount of milk from that sow. Now this is a study that is reported, multi-station study from the Netherlands, Canada, and the US, looking at 57 sows, 15 to 20 days of lactation, a diet, positive and negative control, and then adding phytase to the negative control diet. It was a low phosphorus and calcium diet, so we do have a little bit of mixing of results. It's not necessarily beyond the phosphorus. It would be phosphorus plus anything else. that the phytase might release. And the main thing they saw was that as you go from a positive to negative control diet, increased body weight loss of the sows, but as we add more phytase to the diet, we reduce the weight loss of those sows. If we look a little bit further on the parity of the sow, then primiparis, parities 2 through 4, we're not seeing a tremendous amount, but these older sows definitely responding very much to the released nutrients from the phytase. So there was work out there that would suggest that, yes, this may have value in sows. So we've got just a small study. We're starting. We'll probably do some more. Just 17 sows on this thing. But we've got a corn, soybean meal, basal diet, adequate phosphorus with 3,000 FTUs of phytase in that. Just looking then at standard reproductive performance, we also have milk composition, piglet bone characteristics. We don't have all of these measured yet. We're still working on the bones and things like that. But the one thing that we have seen is that even with this limited number of sows, 8 on one treatment, 9 on the other, we have a statistically significant reduction in days to estrus following weaning. So low number of sows, but at least an indication that there might be some benefit to them. If you look at the things we had thought, piglet body weight at weaning, we do not have an increase like we did in the first one, so we'll keep adding numbers to that. But that's how we do it. You start out and just keep adding and see where it goes. So we've got one study where we have increased body weight, and this one's not showing it yet. We have some of the milk analysis. You can look at the final column p-values here and see you have nothing, no statistical significance in anything at this point. So I'm not sure we're going to see anything or not as we continue with it. So the summary of this sow study is that we reduced the weaned estrus interval and might be associated with improved body condition. We still don't know about the milk phosphorus content. We're analyzing that, and then bone integrity of the pigs. Overall, our conclusions would be that there are beneficial effects of superdosing to phytase, even in phosphorus adequate diets. Now, when we do use this commercially, we're not going to keep feeding all that phosphorus. We'll reduce that. So we'll get a phosphorus loading value for the phytase. But the point is that that phytase can also have an energy value, and it can have an amino acid digestibility value on that also. ATD, phosphorus and fibrous components can be improved, and I would also add fat there. We can get effects on carcass leanness, and perhaps sow reproduction. We'll continue on that. We'll see what happens. But between our work showing that weaned estrus interval is improved, that's very consistent with the work from that multi-university study from the Netherlands, Canada, and US that showed that weight loss on these sows is different. So very pleased that we're seeing these positive effects. A variety of people have been helpful in this. As I said before, it was National Pork Board funded project. I'm very pleased about their funding for us. AB Vista stepped in. We used AB Vista enzymes on this particular project. Dean Boyd sourced the fiber sources for us. Pete Wilcock at AB Vista. What I've done is I've worked with the National Pork Board even after funding. Usually sit down and start talking to people in the industry and get their input on refining some of the treatments. Trying to work together and hopefully doing a little better job of delivering to the industry something for their checkoff dollars. So with that, I thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to show you some of our work, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have them.